Hello, everyone. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining Dream Defenders Fight Club Session 4 on Black feminism and organizing from the margins. We will be recording this and uploading it into our YouTube playlist, so check out an email with more information for that coming up soon. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Wanted to check in with folks to see how folks are doing. So go ahead and put a number in the chat. How are you showing up today? We have some Black freedom fighters up on the screen, if you're able to see that, on a scale of 1 to 5. So we want to do a temperature check. How are folks showing up today? How are you coming in? How are you feeling? And then we also have an icebreaker question on who are the Black women, femmes, or non-men whose resistance made space for you. So go ahead, put your number in the chat. We'll also go ahead and copy and paste the question in the chat, and then feel free to share if you want to come off mute, if you want to type it up in the chat, and we'll give it a couple minutes for folks to share their answers. All right, so seeing a lot of ones, a couple threes and fours. So we got some variety on how folks are showing up, some more fours. What about the icebreaker question? Folks want to put some of their responses. Who are the Black women and femmes that whose resistance has made space for you? Okay, awesome. I'm seeing some more folks in the chat. People are mentioning their family members that made space for them, that showed them what resistance looked like. People like Audre Lorde and Fannie Lou Hamer and Bell Hooks, definitely. We're going to be talking about what does Black feminism mean to us, and we're going to be naming some folks in the movement that have shaped our understanding and what that looks like for us today. All right, we'll give it maybe one more minute for folks to put in the chat to check in. Who are the Black women and femmes in your life, or people that you have studied, or people, it could be people across the world who maybe you haven't met but have an impact on you and have made space for you in the resistance movement. Asada Shakur, for sure, rest in power. She has taught us a lot on how to be a freedom fighter and what that means in today's world. All right, we got some more folks naming Angela Davis, Octavia Butler, some more Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, seeing a lot of similar names that folks are typing in. Marsha P. Johnson, June Jordan, Allison Walker. People also naming their other family members, like their siblings, their sister, their mother, their aunt, their great grandmother, that are showing us what resistance looks like and has made space for them. Okay, great. Feel free to keep naming folks in your communities that have made space for you in the chat. But we'll go ahead and get started about who is Dream Defenders. We'll talk about some community agreements, and then we'll get in with the rest of our program. So who is Dream Defenders? If this is not your first time joining Fight Club, then you have probably heard this already. This is our fourth session. So thanks for everyone who's made it along for the ride thus far. We'll have 2 more sessions coming up in November, plus a Sunday school in December. So we hope you guys can continue joining us for our Fight Club sessions. And we're so proud of y'all for making it up to this moment. So far, what we have learned in the past 3 sessions, we have learned on what does racial capitalism mean? What does class mean, and what are the different structures in class? What does imperialism mean, and what does that mean for us as people living in the US in the belly of the beast? And now for today's session, we are going to be talking about one of our own pillars, which is Black feminism and how Black feminism is used to organize from the margins. So in Dream Defenders, we are fighting for safety and a good life for all people, but particularly with Black and marginalized people, especially now as we're seeing increased violence, increased poverty, the climate crisis that's happening, and attacks on our people. So we are a political home for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and working class people across the US. And at the end, we'll talk more about what we have upcoming and ways that you guys can get involved with us. All right, so you guys should have already seen these community agreements before. So we're just going to review them one more time, that these are the agreements that we are all abiding by in the space, and hope that everyone can respect that. So one, again, just be curious, show up with questions and curiosity in the space, respecting people's pronouns as they introduce themselves, take care of your own needs. If you need to grab some food, grab some water, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself during the call. Assuming best intentions, so just assuming that folks are coming into the space with the best mind and heart. And if something maybe rubs you the wrong way, feel free to flag that in the chat, and then we can do a recourse, but just assuming that people are coming in with the best mind at heart. Engage and participate. The space is more full and more fun when folks are participating. So we want y'all to come off mute, speak in the chat, and speak in our Q&A that we're going to be sharing a little bit later to make sure that this is an engaging opportunity for you all. Take space, make space. Again, if you are someone who may be shy, try to make some space for yourselves to come up in the call. And also, if you are someone who tends to maybe talk a lot, or maybe taking up a lot of space, just making space for others to make sure everyone has a fair chance to participate. And lastly, tell your own story. So again, what's any lessons that you learned from here? Any lessons that you learned from here, feel free to share the lessons, but keeping the story, especially if folks are being vulnerable or sharing, personal details about themselves, their communities. So just keeping that in mind. And we want folks to be open to be able to tell your own story as well. So again, these were the community agreements that we have shared for the past month and a half in our session. So again, just want to have folks put an emoji or a one in the chat just to clarify that everyone agrees with these community agreements throughout the call. All right, I see a couple more emojis. All right, everyone agrees or puts a thumbs up. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Last thing, I know earlier I mentioned a Q&A, which is a new thing we are starting for today's session. During our session, we will have some questions that we want people to reflect on. So instead of putting your answers in the chat, or if you have any questions for our panelists, which will be brought in a little bit later, instead of putting your questions in the chat, you should see a Q&A button on your toolbar. It's either next to like the leave button, or it might be next to the share screen button. If you don't see it on your toolbar, you might have to click the more option with the three dots. And then if you do that, you should see the Q&A button there. Once you do that, you should be able to see that pop up, and then we will open it for when it's time to do the Q&A. And then that is where you can send in your questions, because we just want to make it a little bit of a smoother process compared to looking through the chat for those. Anyone have questions about the Q&A, or is there anyone who can't find that on their toolbar? Okay, cool. Awesome. Now I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to our National Organizing Director, Shaquille, and she's going to be getting us started.
Hey everybody, thank y'all for being here this evening. Before we even get into talking about Black feminism, I want to just take a few moments to name the world that we're living in this moment, because the conditions we're facing right now are the reason that these conversations matter. So we're watching the US slide deeper and deeper into authoritarianism, Trump and his allies deploying troops, National Guard in places they don't belong, moving unilaterally towards oligarchy, consolidating power right in front of our faces. The Supreme Court's also letting this happen. We're seeing news about redistricting in many of the red states. Meanwhile, Congress has power to do something and they won't move. The government shutdown continues. We are seeing folks at risk of losing their SNAP benefits, other benefits. Federal workers, food service workers could deal with the loss of these benefits in just a few days. And we know the next election cycle is a midterm year. And historically, the party that is in power loses. But this time, we don't know what's going to happen because what's at stake is more than just politics, it's power itself. So globally, we are seeing fascism on the rise. We're seeing from Bolivia to Japan to Germany. We know that these aren't isolated incidents. For those of us that have been in Fight Club since the beginning, we know this is a larger manifestation of an empire in crisis. The US is pulling out of international agreements regarding environmental support and controls, regarding access to materials across the Caribbean, dropping bombs, militarizing everything, not just abroad, but also here at home. ICE is expanding faster than any other agency, operating with nearly no oversight. People are facing crushing financial hardship. Many people on the call, many of our community members, our family members are being affected by things that are happening this week. In the middle of all this, we're just coping the best way that we can. We talked about this as a team, but people are using Chat GPT for therapy. There's deep fake videos out. There's hustle culture that is being amplified and raise yourself up by your bootstraps. Fuck it, we ball energy. But we know the system's breaking and people are either trying to survive it or dissociate from it. So this is the moment that we're in. It's a moment of danger but also of deep possibility because when the center falls, when those in power fall, the margins become the place where new worlds are born. And we'll be talking a little bit about those definitions shortly. But that's also what Black feminism teaches us that the margins have always been places where we create, strategize, and develop care practices. So even in the 1800s, when Black people were enslaved and or newly freed, I put that in air quotes for those that are just listening in, they were still being denied their humanity, and they were already naming the contradictions that white feminists refused to see. And that's what Sojourner Truth did in 1851. She stood up at a women's rights convention in Akron, Ohio, surrounded by white women talking about fragility and protection, and asked the question that still echoes through many liberation struggles today: ain't I a woman? So before we get deeply into it, I wanted to read this as a cultural offering to you all. And kind of root us in the fact that this is a journey that is a continuation. It's something that we have continued to experience and will continue to have to fight against the patriarchal structures that be. So I'll get right into it. Ain't I a woman? Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women at the North all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? Intellect. That's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in black there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where does your Christ come from? Where does your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women ought together to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do it. The men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me, and now old sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. Go ahead and drop some emojis in the chat for our fire ass Sojourner Truth, who I found out today was actually 6 feet tall, and she stood on business, all 10 toes, not one toe missing. So we're going to anchor ourselves in that space with that revolutionary perspective and that revolutionary struggle. Thank y'all for the emoji drops. So let's get right into it. Next slide, please. I want to take a few moments to ground us in where Black feminism comes from and why it still matters. It isn't just about history, it's the soil that we're growing from as a collective people. All of y'all in the chat are a part of this fight. And I want to be clear today that when we talk about this men and women gender binary, that's shorthand in this particular presentation. There are more than two genders. Trans women are women too. Non-binary, agender, and gender expansive people experience patriarchy and the effects of this capitalist imperialist system that we're in. So I just want to root us in that conversation. We might be hearing men, women, whatever, but we're talking about folks across the gender spectrum and their relationship and association to the patriarchal experience. And a lot of the folks that you're going to be seeing today on the slides and that are rooted in this historical perspective have mentioned that feminism needs to include all of us. Next slide, please. So some key definitions. As a matter of fact, one of y'all, somebody come off mute, please, and read the textbook definition of feminism in the Oxford definition, please.
I'll read it.
Thank you.
Okay. So feminism, it is movements to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. The Oxford definition is the advocacy of equality between the sexes, encompassing the establishment of the political, social, and economic rights of the female sex.
Thank you, Losh. Can I get someone to read patriarchy for me?
I will.
Thank you, Sean.
Patriarchy is the system where men hold power and dominate in roles of political, moral, and social authority. An unjust social system that enforces gender roles and is oppressive to both men and women. It often includes any social mechanism that evokes male dominance over women.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Losh. Next slide, please. We might have to stop and reshare, Kim, because we can't hear. But while you're doing that, I wanted to amplify the margins because that was in the title of this particular program today, Black Feminism and Organizing the Margins. So when Black feminist thinkers talk about margins, they're describing the literal and figurative places where people who don't fit into the dominant power structures live and survive. So this is where Black women, queer people, disabled people, and the poor are often forced socially, politically, and economically, and sometimes spiritually. But the margins aren't just places of exclusion, they're also places of deep creativity, connection, and radical imagination. So Audre Lorde here talks about the margins.
You live on the edge of any structure, you have to know that survival is not theoretical. I know that as a Black woman, I know that as a lesbian. Whenever you are conscious that your identity is on the edge, survival becomes very, very real. And once you live on the level of survival as a reality, you learn that you have to value and critique the particulars all the time, because at any moment, anything can mean the end. And that gives you a kind of sharpness, yes.
Thank you, beautiful Audre Lorde, for sharing those words with us. So to reiterate, Black feminism begins in the margins because it's from that position that we're able to see the full picture. Just think about you, an astronaut, you go, you see the world, you're like, wow, it is round. You see what's going on there. You have a bird's eye view and perspective. So when you're able to see the whole system, you're able to dream and create things beyond that. So I just wanted to reiterate that piece. And I'll be sending some additional follow-up materials out to y'all after the session. So we can go to the next slide. I'm trying to get us to our guests. So we're going to power through the waves of feminism in the United States. These are like textbook examples, things that pop up. Again, we're talking about margins today. There are a lot of examples you won't see, but this is 101 to root you in an understanding so that you can have deeper political conversations and ideological conversations about how we move and develop our power within these structures that we're fighting. Next slide, please. So This is just a snapshot. When we're talking about the waves of the US feminist movement, we're talking about periods of organized political struggle. That's not to say that in the points that are not on this timeline, that struggles didn't happen. We're talking about mass organized political struggle. And a lot of these moments had really big wins, but there were also huge blind spots in the organizing practices. So let's go to the next slide. Let's walk through them quickly and see where Black feminism comes into play. So the first wave from 1848 to the early 1920s had to do with suffrage and betrayal. And when I say suffrage, I don't mean suffering. I'm referring to suffrage, which is the right to vote in political elections. So the first wave of feminism on paper started in 1848 at Seneca Falls, where a bunch of white people, women, demanding the right to vote, gathered over the course of 2 days in New York. But the roots of Black feminism came out of abolition, where Black women like Sojourner Truth and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who was a poet and abolitionist, a writer, one of the first Black women published in the United States. These folks and their comrades, their homies, were already connecting women's rights to the fight against enslavement and the connection and ability to be a part of the political process in the United States. Then came the 15th Amendment, when Black men gained the right to vote and white women lost their minds. They lost their minds. The movement turned racist really fast. Not that it wasn't already, but it was super racist. And they literally pushed women, Black women, to the back. So when Sojourner Truth stood up and said, "Ain't I a woman?" that was intersectionality in practice before it was even a word. So white suffragists were doubling down in this process. And then when the 19th Amendment was passed, most of the Black women in the South were still blocked from voting. So while white women moved on, Black women had to keep fighting for the right to even participate in democracy in the political process, all the way up to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Yep. So some of our parents, grandparents, some of y'all great grandparents, you very young things, are ones that were part of this struggle, and we still continues today, as we mentioned in the opening comments regarding voting rights being stripped away through these redistricting processes. So that, excuse me, gives you a snapshot of the first wave. Next slide. So the second wave of feminism in the United States where it was a period where books like The Feminine Mystique, you see a copy on your screen right now by Betty Friedan, came out. And this is kind of literature that had white women and housewives realizing, damn, I'm kind of miserable. It sucks having to wash the dishes and feed the kids and do nothing else and not be able to open a bank account. This was in the 1960s. So meanwhile, while this is happening, Black women were like, we've always had to work. Our problems weren't boredom in the suburbs. It's poverty, violence, sterilization, and attempts to survive. And this stemmed again from enslavement. So the second wave had real wins that included more access to shelters, credit, in the ending of spousal rape, again on paper, but it also had extreme blind spots because they didn't show up for Black people. And that is where we see the split happening, because you can't talk about the liberatory process if you're not including the people that are most impacted by oppression. And out of that split came Black feminism as we know it. Next slide. So, Black feminism came from Black women saying you can't separate racism from sexism. You can't separate racism, sexism from class struggle, just like we were talking about in the previous sessions about the structure of racial capitalism and how that relates to class and how you have to analyze them at the same time. It's the same concept. You can't separate the two. So before I dive a little bit into this, I want to be clear, and I want y'all all, if y'all don't take anything else away from this session, take this away. Black feminism is not a branch of white feminism. Again, Black feminism is not a branch of white feminism. It's its own tree that has its own roots that are a combination of our ancestral practices, our lived experiences, and our engagement with the political process. So I want to make that abundantly clear before we get off this line. So while women like Sojourner laid the foundation, I also want to highlight the Combahee River Collective, and we'll get into them a little bit later, but they said we are not free until all of us are free. So if you go to the next slide, we will see a screen of some of the key thinkers. A lot of them y'all uplifted in the chat earlier. Black feminism says that survival is political and that care is resistance. And this is a snapshot. Again, this is a snapshot. This is 101 of some of the thinkers and contributors to Black feminist ideology. And two of them you'll hear from later this evening. But every single generation, we've had visionaries who gave language to what we are living in. So Audre Lorde reminded us that difference is not our weakness. It's our power. Bell Hooks taught us about radical political love as the foundation of freedom. Alice Walker gave us the concept of womanism, which centers community and wholeness. Patricia Hill Collins said that the people living the struggle are the ones who know how to solve their problems. We got Charlene and Barbara, who continue to call for movements rooted in Black queer feminist politics, healing, and collective power. And these scholar activists trace the lineage of radical Black feminist leadership and scholarship. And so these thinkers were not just folks that are theorizing, they gave us and are giving us maps for collective liberation. Next slide, please. All right, so as we talk about these intersections, the same courage to name the whole system rose up with these women in the Combahee River Collective. And this was a group of Black lesbian feminists in Boston who came together in the 1970s and said, we're tired of this shit. We're done waiting for liberation to trickle down. They were organizers, they were writers, they were everyday workers, and they named what nobody else wanted to say, that racism, sexism, capitalism, and heterosexism don't just overlap, they're interlocking systems that shape our lives at every level. They also named that Black women live at the crossroads of multiple oppressions, and that means that we also sit at the center of liberation work. Again, when you have oppressed people that are fighting against larger systems, those are the people that are sitting at the center of liberation work because these are their lived experiences. We have the facts that show that those are the affected parties. So next slide, please. I need a brave soul. Okay, you can skip that one, Kim. Next slide. To read this statement, please, this excerpt of a statement. And if nobody volunteers, I'm gonna volunteer Sean.
I got it.
Thank you, Jess.
Love their statement. We are a collective of Black feminists who have been meeting together since 1974. During that time, we've been involved in the process of defining and clarifying our politics, while at the same time doing the political work within our own group and in coalition with other progressive organizations and movements. The most general statement of our politics at the present time would be that we are actively committing to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and see as our particular task the development of integrated analysis and practice based upon the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking. The synthesis of these oppressions creates the conditions of our lives. As Black women, we see Black feminism as a logical political movement to combat the manifold and simultaneous oppressions that all women of color face.
Thank you, Jess. I'm going to take facilitator's privilege real quick. How does that resonate with y'all? Do you agree with the Combahee River Collective? With these intersections, what comes up for you when you hear this and read this? Okay, I got one engagement in the chat. Thank you, Jess, who read as well. Okay, I see a couple 100 emojis. We moving and grooving. I need y'all to interact with me. We're revolutionaries. We got to be organizing off of Zoom. I need the voices in the room. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you for that engagement, y'all. So, the Combahee River Collective wasn't random. They took the name from the Combahee River Raid, I believe, of 1863, which was a mission led by Harriet Tubman that freed over 700 enslaved people in South Carolina's Low Country. That is where I'm at right now, a huge land of resistance. So it's not just symbolism, it's saying that our feminism comes from resistance, it comes from strategy, and it comes from care in action. And shout out to Harriet Tubman because that raid wasn't just military genius, it was organized liberation. And that collective carried the same energy into the 1970s, insisting that the survival of Black women, our pure survival, is a revolutionary act. Next slide, please. Okay, so now a quick, and when I say quick, I mean quick. If y'all need follow-up resources, we will provide them. But a quick word on womanism. It was coined by Alice Walker, and she coined it because many women, like many women, she didn't see herself in white feminism. So womanism says that our liberation can't stop at gender. It has to include the whole spectrum. It has to include the whole community. It has to include our families, our people, our spirit. So while white feminism generally, as it was originally presented, was focusing on equality, womanism had a sharper focus on healing, wholeness, and survival. So the two aren't contradictions, womanism and feminism, or mutually exclusive. We don't have time to dive deep into it today, but I will say the main point, I think it might be next slide, Kim. Yes. So at the very bottom, this is Alice Walker's definition of womanist from In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, 1983. Alice says that womanist is the feminist as purple is to lavender. And this, I'll leave this up for a few seconds so y'all can skim over it because it's a very, very beautiful depiction, a very lovely generated definition from Alice. I'll let y'all sit with that for a minute. And I'm gonna drop an emoji in the chat because Alice Walker is ice cold. All right, next slide, please. Okay, y'all, stay with me. I know it's a lot of information, but I got to give you the rundown because the way our government is going right now, who knows whether or not you'll have access to this information again. So we're now in the third wave, think 1990s, early 2000s. We're beginning to bring intersectionality into the mainstream. So this time, Rebecca Walker is writing on becoming the third wave after the Anita Hill hearings calling out the silencing of women of color. Next slide, please, Kim. So for those of you that don't know, Anita Hill was a law professor who testified under oath that she was sexually harassed by Clarence Thomas when they worked together at the Department of Education and I think the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC. So the hearings, they resulted in the confirmation of Thomas to the Supreme Court, and it brought to the national landscape issues of sexual harassment within the government, but it also this particular movement and the folks that backed Anita Hill were credited with sparking the Year of the Woman, which saw like very new amounts of women being elected to Congress. So Anita went through this experience, put the team on her back to bring it to the forefront. Are we disappointed that this happened? Yes. Are we surprised? No, because this is a system that we're existing under, and this is just another example of someone trying to amplify those contradictions so we can do something about it. Next slide, please. Woo! All right, y'all. We're in the fourth wave. We're in the fourth wave now. So this is the 2010s to present day. And if you saw my original timeline, I had the 2100s on there. Because who knows what will happen then? But I know that a large degree of our people will be in power. So from a digital organizing standpoint, from an abolitionist intersectionality standpoint, we saw the Me Too movement rising up, more concentration around reproductive justice and the leadership of trans and Black queer women who are shaping what liberation looks like today. So a lot of scholarship, a lot of call outs, a lot of media coverage were associated with these campaigns. And for us, it traces back to the same truth in this moment as we continue to see the digital organizing space develop in spaces like this being cultivated for educational exchange. We know that we can't win freedom for some of us, it has to be all of us. And that is kind of what is happening with the fourth wave. And we're in it right now. So there's an opportunity for you all on the line as freedom fighters to shape what is happening for this historical moment. So the next time we give this presentation, your name might be on the screen because you are being a leader and the anchor in this particular wave of the movement. Next slide, please. All right, so it's kind of hard to see. I might have to zoom in a little bit, but these are some examples of the rise of centralism, of thinking about women in the movement, about feminist ideologies and structures. So even the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee put out a position paper on women in the movement. We see the emergence of town halls, data being released on demographic, gender, race, and sexual disparities. And then we see the Say Her Name campaign, Sandra Bland. These are things that are all a part of this current moment and this current wave. And so this is just a snapshot of different activities to kind of centralize and anchor that message that there's a lot of organizing happening in these areas. And then I want to uplift what Barbara said in the chat. We talk about Anita Hill. It was not more women elected. That was the main outcome. African American women in defense of ourselves mobilized 1,600 Black women to put a statement in Black and mainstream media and an ad in New York Times, and led to a 3-year organizing effort. So again, it's another example of anchoring ourselves in the work on the margin. So let's do some emojis in the chat for that. And I know that Barbara was deeply involved in some of the founding of several organizations that were doing that work. So next slide, please. All right, y'all. I have almost come to the end of my yapping before we engage our guests. So in this moment, why does Black feminism matter, and what is our position as an organization? So because Dream Defenders is a Black feminist organization, not in name only, but in practice, we believe in the collective survival of our people. We fight patriarchy and capitalism, specifically racial capitalism and empire as one system. And we're building power through care, discipline, and vision. So the future we're fighting for is everything that these folks that we shared examples of have been fighting for and fought for most of their lives. If we were free as Black women, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free because of the structure of society. So, with that grounding, I'm going to read the last bullet point there. We organize not just as feminists, but as people across the spectrum committed to collective survival and transformation. So I know that was very fast. Again, it's 101, so I wanted to give y'all a little taste and snapshot of history. And with that grounding and quick history lesson, we're going to move into the next part where y'all are going to be able to explore how Black feminism shows up inside our organizing and daily practices. So I want to call to the stage our guests. Next slide, please, Kim. And as I bring them up, I'm reflecting a little bit and knowing that this is an active political process, and Black feminism is not just something that has happened in history. It's something that we are inheriting, and we have to practice it every single day in our organizing, in our art, in the ways that we love and protect one another. And when we talk about carrying that lineage forward, the work of connecting struggle to theory and turning care into political strategy, two people who embody that so powerfully are Charlene Carruthers and Barbara Ransby. Both of them are freedom fighters, scholars, and teachers in the deepest sense, people who have shaped how our movements think about leadership and solidarity, what it really means to fight for liberation from the ground up. So before I bring them in, I need y'all to like clap them up, give me some emojis, because we're witnessing like living legacy. We're all part of this historical process of moving our liberation forward. Charlene is a writer, a filmmaker, a community organizer, national founding director of BYP 100, a key thinker in how we practice Black feminism. Shout out to you, love you. And then Barbara Ransby, I feel like I would be disrespectful by even giving y'all this short bio because of the impact that this woman has had on my life. But as a historian, author, and movement leader who has written on so many Black feminists and Black feminist radical traditions, a founding member of so many different organizations, including Project South, InfraBL's Policy Table, Black Women's Blueprint, the other orgs she dropped in chat earlier, and continues to mentor generations of organizers, educators, and storytellers. So this is part of our efforts to bring these intergenerational conversations forward. So let's get right into it. Let's bring our guests to the stage. How are y'all feeling? How you living? Let me see where they at.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Let me see if we can pin them, Kim. Okay. So how are y'all feeling? What's going on?
Good. I appreciate this grounding in history. Wonderful.
Beautiful. So I know Charlene, you want to say anything?
Oh, likewise, I'm ready to dig into it. I have many reflections from what was shared. Uh, some maybe some, yeah, yeah. Grateful to be here.
Okay, cool. Well, we're grateful to have you. I know everyone's excited to engage with y'all in the chat. So let's just start with that. What are your initial reflections? What came up for you in that quick historical grounding? What would you add? And then we'll get into a couple questions.
Barbara, you want to start?
Well, I can. Well, first of all, thank you to Dream Defenders. I love Dream Defenders and I love Charlene, so I'm happy to be here this evening. Um, I think I appreciate Shaquille grounding us in history. I'm a historian. And I think we don't, understand what we're up against unless we get that sense of history, right? Both the history of our enemies and the history of our people. So I really appreciate that. And I guess I would add a couple things. History is never a linear, one-dimensional narrative, right? It's always contestation and struggle and back and forth and all kinds of contradictions thrown in. So, even when we look at the abolitionist movement and look at Frederick Douglass was a supporter of the Seneca Falls gathering. He was a supporter of women's rights, but then split with the white feminists around the 14th and 15th Amendments. So, I say that to say not to get nerdy about history, but to say here we are in this moment and we have to navigate a way forward that is, for lack of a better term, intersectional, but that is not just a Black feminist way forward, is a Black left feminist way forward. Because what I've also come to terms with is a need to name anti-essentialism, which is to say that every Black woman is not a Black feminist. You can be uh, you can be other than a Black woman and buy into and accept and internalize and build your praxis around a Black feminist analysis. For example, Condoleezza Rice, uh, Candace Owens, conservative Black women have made choices to not just break with Black feminism, but to pursue an antithetical path. So we have to make sure we don't slide into any kind of essentialist thing. I have a lot more to say. I mean, I don't want to start into a whole, I sort of divided my remarks into pieces, but in this moment, the reason I think this gathering is important and this conversation is important is Black feminism offers Black left feminism, and let me just add what the distinction is there. Black left feminism meaning we understand racial capitalism as a core component augmented by white supremacy and patriarchy of what oppresses all of us in this society. There are certain academic Black feminists who might not add class and capitalism, who might just say it's race, class, it's race, gender, and sexuality. And so we have to at this point make distinctions. I would say Black left feminism is the dominant mode of feminist thought from June Jordan and Audre Lorde and Barbara Smith and the Combahee Collective and so forth. Uh, but there are articulations of Black feminism that don't include that whole politic. The reason that whole politic is important, particularly as a resistance to fascism, is it says no one can get thrown under the bus. So, contrary to the idea that Black feminism or what gets, labeled as identity politics is divisive, Black left feminism is actually what brings us together and says that we can't dissect out or silo or extricate different forms of oppression, that the system works as a whole. And that understanding means that solidarity is the bulwark against fascism. Building as broad a tent as we can, a principled tent, and I think we can build a progressive united front, not just a raggedy, unprincipled united front. We can build a principled united front with many different groups that have an end. And Trump, in some ways, there's no silver lining in this because we are up against a growing fascist movement. But in some ways, him recklessly attacking and undermining so many different groups who might not even have been politicized to the level that they are now, has given us as organizers, as movement builders, as revolutionaries, a certain kind of opportunity, which of course can be squandered. Opportunities have been squandered in the past, can be squandered. But if we take it, it means that we can build with a larger group of people around this intersectional analysis, around this holistic approach to liberation, around this message that there are so many layers that we can't peel off one without damaging the other, and that we have to really envision a new kind of society. And that's the invitation of Black left feminism, and so many quotes point us in that direction, and so many quotes from Black feminist forebearers, give us hope and inspiration and direction in this moment. And I can call some of those into this space in a little bit. But that's just my initial reaction. I appreciate the framing. I appreciate the grounding in history. And I think we have to lean into the courage of the past, not try to replicate. History does not repeat. Please, no one say that in this call. It doesn't. The fact that something has already transpired means that we have that historical memory, so we can't repeat it. We're in different circumstances. We are in a circumstance of racial capitalism being in deep crisis. And what this fascist moment is responding to is that crisis. It is white Christian nationalism as an effort to save racial capitalism from itself. And we have to offer an alternative to people. So, I'll stop there. There's a lot to say. It's hard to know where to weigh in without giving a speech. And I appreciate the interactional tone of the gathering tonight. And I'm eager to hear what my beloved Charlene Carruthers has to say. So I'll stop there.
Okay. And thank you, Barbara. In absolute agreement. I deeply appreciate how you grounded us in history, Shaquille. And particularly one thing that really sticks out to me is the emphasis you had on like that white women did not create, that Black feminism is not simply a branch of white feminism. I think it's really important to dig into the context that you gave us around how these movements emerge or how they're connected to movements to abolish chattel slavery across the Americas and frankly across the globe where it was happening, and that many white women of that time, of that particular part of the era or that time, were inspired to fight for their own freedom by watching Black people fight for theirs, and that includes Black people across genders. And at many points, as Barbara noted, be it Frederick Douglass or other actors, they who were Black, they wavered, and white wavered in their interest in like collective liberation for all, or even their investment in those things. And for me, I definitely situate Black feminisms, be it Black left feminisms, Black queer feminisms, Black radical, revolutionary, African feminisms, at least of the left, within a broader radical tradition. And what Cedric Robinson, who was a political scientist, would call the Black radical tradition. I'm not sure if somebody else called it before him, Barbara. You can correct me on that. But he's oftentimes credited with the framework of the Black radical tradition. But I also know that oftentimes people are credited with things that they may or may not have actually came up with first at all. But the broader point is that they're from, I would imagine, or based on my understanding, not just my imagination, from the first time somebody was attempted to be stolen from the continent of Africa for the purposes of, or stolen from their homes because there were stops along the way, even like off the coast of Africa, stolen from their homes for the purposes of being transported or into the broader slave trade, to now, people have always refused. There's always been a tradition of people wanting something else. And Black feminism is within that broader tradition. And just like that broader tradition, it wasn't always about everybody at all times. And to Barbara's point, that there are absolutely Black feminisms, a Black feminism that is not about the liberation of all people, that is not about fully dismantling racial capitalism, in particular, one that is not always, there ones that are not fully about gender liberation or including people of all gender identities and experiences. Um, and within the broader Black radical tradition, one can, of course, point to moments in which, or times in which it just wasn't about all Black people. And we're even in a moment right now where there are Black radicals mostly in the United States who think that Black liberation is for only people who are what they believe to be descendants of slavery here in the United States of America, or what is oftentimes known as ADOS. When in fact, that is so counter-revolutionary. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit more. Maybe that's not for this conversation in particular. But when we're talking about Black left feminisms, we mean all Black people, and that our claims, be it for reparations, our claims for restitutions, our claims for justice, are global. And the actors that require us to make claims for reparations, for restitution, for justice are global. And that Black people have always moved. They have always moved, like, pre and post emancipation, pre and post the abolition of chattel slavery in the Americas. Black people have always moved. And Black feminism, at least leftist Black feminisms, are and have been in a broader tradition of understanding that Black people are connected globally and our claims are global. And to limit it is to feed into conservatism, is to feed into our enemies' beliefs. And so oftentimes when I hear people espousing views about who's in and who's out, it feels like they're parroting what the right, the conservative right, the Christian nationalists say. And the last thing I want to mention before we continue is the piece around patriarchy, and to really emphasize that anyone can play into, can can leverage or use patriarchy, and specifically patriarchal violence. It is not quarantined to men or people who identify as men. It's not limited to them. Patriarchal violence can show up in many places, while at the same time, what is really important to note is that people who are categorized as men or more masculine, and that category is unstable. It is deeply unstable. Who's in and who's out can change. Who's in and who's out, that's what I mean by unstable. Who's in and who's out can change based on a number of things. But people who are in closer proximity, or who want to be in closer proximity to those things, can use patriarchy as a means to oppress other people. And we see that actually playing out right now in this moment where racial capitalism is in crisis. So is patriarchy. It's all connected. It's all connected, which is why we see the rise of the trad wives.
Right.
Like that is connected to racial capitalism, and it is connected to, which is inherently connected to patriarchy as well. And patriarchy precedes in many ways racial capitalism. They're all connected. They're all connected. And so as we see people trying to return to so-called traditions of traditional roles in households, so-called, and I'm not saying that there aren't women and people who want to like stay at home. It's about having the choice to do that. That's what feminisms are about. It's about being able to choose to do that, and for that to not be the determined position that you take up. And so it's all, when we see people trying to say we need to return to the traditional roles and stuff like that, that is a symptom or manifestation of how racial capitalism is falling apart in this country too.
Can I just build on two things that Charlene said, Shaquille, before and I would love to have
Go
your
ahead.
voice in the room also. One is about this question of internationalism. She's talking about the ADOS people, the African descendants of slaves, and people who've defined a model for reparations that excludes our siblings in the Caribbean or on the continent or wherever. I mean, it belies an understanding of the global nature of the trade in enslaved bodies, right? Because we have colonialism meant there were enslaved people in Britain, there were enslaved people all over Europe where there were colonies, there were enslaved people in Latin America. Largest number coming to the Americas ended up in Brazil and so forth. So it belies that whole network of trafficking in black bodies, and is very short-sighted and conveniently deployed at precisely the moment that we need black internationalism to be at the forefront of our politics. So I very much appreciate the articulation of that. The other thing about patriarchy, as we define fascism, because we're not just this is not just a moment. This is a moment of ascendant fascism. It's not just authoritarian, it's fascism. And fascism has never been of a single model, right? There are certain characteristics: militarism, hypernationalism, uh, often scapegoating a particular group, and patriarchy. It is the fatherland. It is this militarized version of masculine political dominance. And we see it so palpably in this moment in the United States. If you listen to any of that idiot Pete Hegseth's speeches, it is a toxic masculinity that he is advocating as the mantle of the nation, right? Purging women from the military, you have to meet the male standard because the male standard is superior. We are going, and Trump said during the not only is he a predator, but he also just forecasted his notion of gender. He said, we have masculinity is in crisis, and that is the populist offering. It's not just white supremacy, but it's a certain notion of white male supremacy that is being offered up to people who aren't even going to benefit from it. It's a psychological wage, as Du Bois said, and others later. But it is this idea that white men have lost something and they will be given something back once this notion of a white Christian nation is redeemed. We have to also dissect, one, the popular rhetoric that gets a fascist movement a popular base, and then we have to essentially follow the money, because a lot of this is happening not just to get white people feeling good. It's not that simple, right? Capitalism, racial capitalism is in crisis, not just the racial part, the capitalist part too, which go together, of course. But it is in crisis for some very specific reasons of 21st century technological development, climate crisis, climate, technology, and financialization of capital are three critical things that I've been looking at that have destabilized capitalism. White Christian nationalism and this fascist mode of governance, which is not distinct from capitalism but connected to capitalism, is the strategy that a dominant sector of the ruling class has employed. Patriarchy is central to that. Militarism, the idea that we just go and blow people up, we beat people up, we take over shit. That is the toxic masculine model of domination, of political bullying in the world, and it is absolutely central to this moment. So if we don't think that we need a Black left feminism to save us and guide us and navigate this moment, we're not looking at all the manifestations of it, and the core manifestations of it are both white supremacy, racism, capitalism, and patriarchy.
Ooh, y'all just gave me a dose of what I needed. So we were talking a little bit about that hypernationalism, patriarchy, and this current moment that's being marked by repression, surveillance, increased militarization, and exhaustion. But we also, like some of the folks on the line, we have new and young organizers emerging. And so I wonder what lessons that either of you can offer from previous moments and movements that we should be carrying forward into our work today, and then what do we need to leave behind to be able to meet this moment where we need to meet it.
One thing that I've been thinking a lot about for a while now, and reflecting on my time when I was doing like grassroots organizing or organizing work, like, as like that was my primary work, is thinking about like how we are with each other, like our relationships with each other. And I witnessed many times like people's like personal, intimate relationships with each other being like, what, how do I say this? Because you play, you was playing Freaky Girl at the beginning of this call, so I feel like I can just use my language. I could be very frank.
I didn't actually understand those lyrics too, so
Oh, okay. Well, I did. I knew the song. I was like, oh, that's a choice for the Black feminist section.
I was a little confused, but okay.
Oh yeah, I know that song. When we used to go to the club a very long time ago, I remember hearing that song because that's how old I am. Um, but people like being irresponsible in their personal relationships with each other. Like just being mad, like we didn't all choose to be together, but we all got to deal with the fallout from y'all breakup or y'all whatever happened in your situationship. Or people feeling that they should be like friends or best friends or confidants or your only friends or whatever that is, or people just having like varying expectations for relationships, or people not treating each other well, or folks not be people all of a sudden because they're on staff, they're no longer treated like people or like human beings, or like you're no longer one of the homies because you're a staff member, or just various things that would show up with relational dynamics or people being violent towards each other. Like that also is a thing that I've seen happen. And just how we relate to each other and being serious about that. And I'm not talking about being perfect, but if we say that we believe in a thing, we believe in liberation, we believe in folks being treated in their full dignity, then why is it not like a part of our organizing training, learning how to navigate conflict? Right? Navigate conflict, harm, and violence. If we call ourselves abolitionists, how are we learning how to like operationalize abolition in our everyday interactions? That's hard work. That's really hard. And so is toppling an empire. Like that is also really hard to topple an empire and transform society and build a more dignified, liberatory world. That's hard. But how can we do that if we don't know how to deal with each other? If we don't know how to be with each other? And I think we need to be just as much of a practice of figuring out how to be with each other, how to deal with conflict, as we are with contending for the big power. And I'm not saying we like navel gaze and only focus what's happening in our organizations, because that's actually not helpful. Because like focus, we spend 75% of our time dealing with staff drama and staff issues and 25% organizing our folks. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, um, much more work and like how we do our organizing training and navigating conflict, right? And that doesn't just happen at a staff retreat, but it happens in how we develop organizers or in the other spaces that we're in. And it's also necessary for us to recognize our organizations aren't going to teach us everything. Organizations aren't the space for everything. While it might be your political home, everybody has different relationships to home. Many people grow up in really fraught home environments, so we can never assume that something being a home equals healthy or equals safe or equals generative. Um, and so I really think a huge lesson that I'm learning and I'm continuing to learn is, and it's not simply just doing like a prefigurative politic where we like practice things now for what we want later, to the detriment of building power. Because I do think that there's prefigurative work that we can do that actually helps, that scaffolds and strengthens our ability to build power. Because oftentimes the shit that makes us fall apart or contributes to us falling apart are internal things that can be exacerbated by external factors. For serious, like obviously like COINTELPRO, other other what's the word I want to use? Ops, whatever, state or non-state actors. And our fissures, our weaknesses allow for a lot of that stuff to happen, to be frank with you. Like they don't actually have to work that hard to infiltrate these days. They don't have to work that hard. It's oftentimes you can just go to Facebook and search for something and you'll find some shit spilling out. And so, yeah, the lesson is around how we are with each other and being as rigorous with that as we are in how we think about and train people to understand power. Even though we could use to be more rigorous with that too, for sure. But maybe we could talk about that later.
Yeah. Now I agree with that, all of that. I sometimes have said I've known people in different periods, different decades and different parts of the world who were involved in revolutionary struggle. And some people were admirable heroes and heroines, who loved the people and loved the revolution and loved the vision of a different society. But you sometimes wonder, like, who did they actually love that they wanted to make the world better for? Because they treated all the real human beings around them like shit, you know. So I think we have to rehearse the world we want to live in, um, and that we have to practice and discipline ourselves to be better human beings as we try to create structures that allow better human beings to thrive in this world. And that's no small thing, that's not Pollyannish. That's a big thing. And actually, to tell you the truth, when you look at socialist experiments around the world, many of them have failed because people did not, ordinary people had not bought into a different way of being human in the world. And a lot of people, even in our communities now, they don't want to be poor. They don't want to suffer. They don't want their kids to suffer. But there's an intoxication and a seductiveness about consumerism, about this sort of gilded kind of capitalism. A lot of the popular culture um, icons, embody this. So people lean into that. I want more of this. I want bigger. I want shinier. I want newer. And I'm gonna hustle to get that. And so it's really building a different culture in our communities and in our movements that is required of us. Now, that said, I also love and appreciate and want to underscore how Charlene ended, which is to say, we don't want to become navel gazers. We don't have that luxury. We don't want to say we're going to create our own little groovy oasis here, and everything else will fall into place. We are not going to do it yourself our way to transformative change. We have to be disciplined. We have to resist certain kinds of individualism in order to function as collectives and as a more cohesive movement. That is really, really needed. And there are a lot of things militating against it. But I mean, all of that is in the mix when we talk about what do we need to leave behind. It is individualism, but it is also a kind of callous way of behaving with friends, lovers, comrades, family, that, speaks to the world we want to create. Um, and I'll say this too, I'm thinking a little bit about Ella Baker's example, where she talked about who in the communities in the South were most influential when SNCC and other organizations went into these communities. And it was often the person who had deep personal relations and caring, loving, supportive relationships with their neighbors and coworkers were the most influential because they had the trust of people. If people don't see you trying to make their lives better now, why should they believe that you have a vision that's going to make the world better and the society better in the future? So it was those people who had demonstrated radical care, if we want to call it that, compassion, generosity to their neighbors and coworkers, that were the people that those neighbors and coworkers were willing to trust and listen to when they were asked to make sacrifices or take risks for the movement. And I think we would really do well to remember that. And part of what needs to happen now is a lot of self-organization, both decentralized organization, but then collective coordinated organization, getting to know our neighbors, building around ideas, but also building around mutual care and survival. And those things go hand in hand, not one without the other. So I'll stop there.
Thank y'all so much. Barbara, you're getting a lot of love in the chat right now for
I need some love right now.
being
Thank
a
you very
living.
much.
Everybody send Barbara some heart emojis and stuff. Give her some love, big love.
That's
All
okay.
right. You just mentioned the need for us to function as a cohesive movement, and I want both of y'all to answer this question to the best of your ability. What new alliances or what new alliances do you see emerging across movements or ones that you believe are required in this moment from the standpoint of your scholarship and your organizing practice? What lessons are coming up in that area? What is required right now for the alliances that we need to move forward? Or what types of alliances are needed in this moment? And that can be from an international perspective, a domestic perspective, whatever you're called to answer.
You want to go, Charlene? You want me to go?
Fine. Either way. Sorry. The later it gets, the less coherent I will be. I don't usually
You know that's not true. Stop saying that.
I don't usually think this late. I could
No.
go.
Okay.
Okay. All right. As we go back and forth. Um, so the first thing that comes to mind for me, because a part of my research, I look at Black relationships or relationalities between Black and non-Black Indigenous people and African Indigenous people, particularly in Liberia, across the United States, what used to be Indian Territory, and also Liberia, which is in West Africa. The Indian Territory was in what is present day Oklahoma. And so I think a lot about what it looks like for Black people across the Americas and non-Black Indigenous people, because there are Black Indigenous people, Black Native people here in the Americas, and Indigenous people in other parts of the world to relate to each other. But in thinking about this particular continent, and to most directly answer your question, the work that has been going on is not new, but it's something that needs to continue and deepen and expand, is the work within Black and Indigenous communities. And not just because it's cute or it sounds good, but literally fundamental questions about land, about how we can understand governance, autonomy on all levels, are things that I feel very clear have to be not just contended across or amongst, but determined in many ways by and with Black and Indigenous people here. And for many, many, many reasons. But there's so many lessons to be learned, both historically about historical alliances that have occurred, and in present day land back and reparations movements. Organizations like the Indian Collective have named very clearly that they have a commitment to reparations for Black people. That includes stewardship of land here, right? But that don't mean that Black people, we just like buy up the block or we just own stuff for the sake of owning things. That is not what this is about. But really leaning into our legacies or traditions of stewarding land, right? Of being intentional about being in right relationship with each other and the land that we live on. These are knowledges and practices that are not new, have existed for quite some time, and by no means are just because you're indigenous or because you're Black, you automatically subscribe to those things. That's not true. But in this moment where we are living in climate crisis and experiencing the impacts of like right now, I mean, any of y'all Jamaican or have families in Jamaica who are going to be impacted, who are being impacted by Hurricane Melissa right now. We know that Hurricane Melissa and the the scope of it, the the scale of it has everything to do with climate change that is manufactured by people, largely by the military, especially by the United States and corporations, right? But they are feeling the brunt of those consequences right now. And so, people, organizations, groups, nations that are about the business of what some people would call, oh gosh, I can't think of the word right now. I cannot think of the word right now. But people who care about land and people who care about the environment and about climate, those are the sorts of alliances that are necessary um, right now and will be necessary for our very survival as a species, frankly. Our survival as a species moving forward from here. So I think that's really important. And for us to take seriously, the last thing I will say is alliances that are required at this moment are people who are literally thinking about our physical and our mental health. So people who are doing food work, which is oftentimes kind of like connected to the land work and the environmental work as well. But one of the highest killers of Black people in this country is heart disease. And that is not simply because we eat certain food. No, that's a simple, like, that's whack. That's a simple story. But there's a much bigger story about structural oppression that contributes to what we have and what we don't have, our stress levels, our physical environments, all of those things. And so, in thinking about the things that literally that kill us more slowly than some of the more acute things, we got to pay attention to those things as well.
Yeah. Well, ditto. We have a lot of agreement, Charlene and I, so you just trade us out. And I'll say if I disagree, so I'm not just,
Oh, I know you will.
just being nice.
I know you
You're
will.
just on point. So what I would add to that, perhaps is, I think we need to take seriously in this moment. So we are in I sometimes joke about not knowing anything about sports, which is absolutely true. But I do know that many of sports have offense and defense. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to defend ourselves because we're under attack. I mean, under attack. And I went to Haiti once, and we had the honor of sitting with uh, former president of Haiti, Aristide,
Mm.
President Jean-Claude Aristide. And I said, how did you make it through, all of the being taken out of the country and having your life threatened and all this kind of stuff? He said, the thing I didn't appreciate at first that I do appreciate now is knowing the difference between my opponents and my enemies. Your opponents disagree with you and your enemies want to kill you.
Mm.
So I think we have to understand in this moment that there is a fascist movement, not just afoot, entrenched, and trying to consolidate. Not consolidated yet, but on that trajectory. And they actually are prepared to kill people. They are doing extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean. I just got a long um, statement from a bunch of actually Black feminists in the Caribbean right now who are saying, the title of the thing is Nobody's Backyard, which is to say they're completely ignoring the vulnerability of all the fishing boats, all, people in that entire region that are being made vulnerable by these completely unprovoked murders of people. So we are in a moment of fascist ascent. In that moment, we need to have coordinated mass-based organizations for as long as we can, and then we need to have those operating on a different register, if you will, uh, once we can no longer operate publicly. I think the Working Families Party needs to make some changes, but has a lot of promise as an alternative. The Democratic Party has totally abandoned even its centrist role, and they've always been compromised and lame and all of this. However, uh, what we have is two wings of the ruling class, and they want to govern in different ways in this moment. But what we see after Trump has taken power is the abdication of any kind of resistance is the majority of the Democratic Party being prepared to essentially throw up their hands in this moment. So in the electoral arena, we need to think of an alternative as long as that is viable. That said, my position has always been a left electoral political party has to always be in the context of a larger movement that is not primarily electoral. In other words, it is subsumed by the movement, not the movement subsumed by it, which is the way it usually functions. It usually functions as if you have an electoral agenda, then you rally up all the community organizations and they deliver votes, and that's the locus of power. We have to rethink where the locus of power is. The locus of power has to be in a movement with a larger vision and agenda and strategic framework, of which electoral politics is one part, right? Labor actions is one part. Mass protest is one part, again, as long as that can be viable. Culture is another part, which we haven't talked about, which is very important in this period. So I think these are some of the things that we have to think of organizing on the local level and a lot of self-organization. I think freedom circles are a great idea of people organizing their neighbors around study, service, and struggle. We have to organize nationally for as long as we can, both to be in the streets and to also fight in the courts, fight in the at the polls, etc. We can't be too black, too left for any of that, right? You have to push on all fronts. And voting is not going to liberate you, but it can delay and derail the fascist train to allow for other organizing to happen. If the fascist train gets totally on track and reaches the station, that is not an option. So it's not like you go to get your comrades out of jail. You get arrested too if you go to get them out of jail. So the whole dynamic changes, and we have to just be very blunt and real about that. But the other level on which we have to organize is transnationally and internationally. And we've not been so good at that. And that, I just have to say, that is not going on delegations as individuals or groups of individuals and coming back and telling your story. Now, Charlene and I have both been on delegations. Those are fine. You come back and you hopefully build something. That is important and insufficient.
Yep.
We have to build transnational. Now, I will tell you one very, very imperfect stab at that. When there was a communist movement in the world, there was a communist international, which had a lot of missteps, mistakes, and all that. But that was an attempt to organize a global socialist left. The Progressive International, which I think Yanis Varoufakis, the Greek Syriza former economic minister, who's just written a book called Techno Feudalism, is one of the prime movers around that. They've gotten a lot of things wrong, but it is a really important attempt to bring together folks from around the world in some sort of ongoing forum about what we're up against from a very decidedly left positionality. So that kind of thing, if it can be refined and honed and be inclusive, is very important. And I would just finally say this. In terms of the national coalitions that are developing, one of the jobs of groups like Dream Defenders and BYP 100 and others is to fight ideologically on the left against the sort of colorblind left path, because there are folks who are succumbing to this very misguided notion that it's all about class. The reason the right has won is because the left didn't address the white working class and divided the working class around race. If you understand racial capitalism, race and class have never been distant cousins. They are intimate partners. And race has, there wasn't the creation of a multiracial working class. There was a creation of a white working class and an enslaved laboring black strata of workers, right? That was deliberate. That was palpable. That was longstanding. That is what allowed this country to get a leg up in the global capitalist landscape and ecosystem. And so we have to understand that when we organize and try to dissect, how to build a movement in this moment. And there are people who would argue bringing up, and they label anything talking about racial justice as identity politics, bringing up these issues is divisive, we left out, we went too far, it's about paychecks, not pronouns, and all this stuff. That is a very dangerous line, and we have to stay in those rooms and fight against that as we build. Coalitions have to be principled coalitions. You can get a lot of people in a room if you don't say anything very substantive, right? We just want things to be good. Let's not talk about how, but we have to talk about how. And we have to struggle with people in a respectful way, in a comradely, not in an arrogant way. But that's what struggle is, as you say. Here's how I see it, and listen to me. Here's my experience. Here's how I understand it. Here's how we need to understand it. And that's the work that we need to do that I think we are a little rusty on.
Can I
Go
add
ahead,
something?
Charlie. Mhm.
So thank you, Barbara, for that, because the thing you said about identity politics is something I mentioned to lift up earlier. So I hope folks who haven't read the Combahee River Collective statement, the whole thing, take some time. I also have it in Spanish if you need it in Spanish, the whole statement, the Spanish translation. Um, but they write about identity politics in the statement. And what I guess two things that are super important is that Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, any of these people, they are all engaging in an identity politic, all of them. It just happens to be, it is a white Christian nationalist, a white nationalist identity politic, wealthy people, all of that. They are organizing from like their identities, their experiences are informing their politics in a particular way, or they shape their politics in a particular way. Right? Then you have identity politics that can emerge from a set of choices, or choices that are informed by experiences, that lead you to be radical, that lead you to be leftist. Right? Everybody don't take that route. It's a choice, over and over and over again, over and over and over again. And so people, I feel like every other day I see something about identity. I mean, there's an article that just came out the other day about identity politics being a problem. And I'm just be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Can we get specific about what we are talking about exactly? Because a liberal identity politics is absolutely a problem. How many people know who Karen Jean-Pierre is? How many people know who Karen Jean-Pierre is? She was the secretary, the press secretary for President Joseph Biden. She got up on that podium day after day after day, lying and making excuses and shilling for the nation state created in 1948 and its genocide against Gazans in Palestine more broadly. Antoine, I cannot deal with you in these comments. I'm not I'm not gonna do this with you. But I don't even know you, Antoine, but I'm not doing this with you today. I'm not gonna kick it. But um I saw a clip of an interview she did. It was on Instagram, but she did the interview on some major news outlet. It could have been CNN or MSNBC. I can't recall right now. But she said, as a black queer woman, talking about the White House, they made some mistakes, but essentially they did the best that they could. And I was just like, this is a liberal at best identity politic. I don't care that you are black, queer, and a woman, and Haitian, never to be Haitian as well. You just sat up there and enabled genocide. And that is not okay. So she was leveraging her identity as an excuse. So that absolutely also happens, right? It is not just because you're black, you're queer, you're a woman, that means you're radical or righteous. It does not mean any of that. These are about choices. These are about actions. These are about how we are with each other. These are about our political activities, all of that stuff. I think it's super, super important to note that people will absolutely use identity as a justification for foolishness. And we have to be able to clock it. We got to be able to see it, and not accept it just because someone looks like us or talks like us or comes from where we come from. Those dudes, those people who are about to do the HBCU tours, the conservatives that are doing those right now, those aren't my people. You know, those are not my people. Not politically, those are not my people, and even socially, frankly. But yeah, I just want to. It's really important for us to be able to see, to discern these things, and even discern them in coalition spaces and within our organization. Like, what's really going on here? Not for the sake of just like being able to call people out or drag people, but to be able to discern like how power is operating, people's perspectives, and even the so-called solutions that they are proposing, and even the way that they're moving. It puts us in a better position to move, I think, more strategically when we can actually clock what's going on in the room and what's going on, in broader society.
Barbara, you look like you had something else to say.
No, yeah, I could just riff off what she's saying, but I don't know how much. I was just taken back to, I was remembering when you mentioned Anita Hill. I was very involved in the We Do mobilization in 1991, which was the newspaper ad campaign and all this kind of stuff. But part of the Clarence Thomas moment was Clarence Thomas actually deployed the trope of lynching. He said it was a high-tech lynching, that he was being called before the Senate to explain himself and being accused of being a sexual harasser. He both employed patriarchy and male privilege, and like this, Anita Hill was not black, she was just a woman, right? She was stripped of her authentic race card, and Clarence Thomas came in to say, I'm the black man being lynched, really exploiting and manipulating the history of racial sexual violence in the black community to situate himself to become someone who has since then proven himself to be, actually hostile to black people's survival and not even controversial issues, just like basic issues. So the way in which identity can be deployed to confuse and derail. And the other important point that Charlene mentions, and I was remiss not to mention sooner, is internationalism is not just solidarity with other black people around the world. Internationalism is solidarity with oppressed people around the world. And sometimes we may have to argue with black people in our own communities or brown people in our own neighborhoods around people who don't speak our language, who we don't, we can't read their script, but are also oppressed people, and that we have to stand on the right side of history to stand, in right relationship with our ancestors. What has happened in Palestine over the last 2 years, has just been, it's been a low point for humanity. And, a black left feminist voice is one that is unhesitating in speaking out against that atrocity. I mean, they're black Palestinians, but that's beside the point.
That's right.
That's beside the point.
Oh, y'all, Charlene, I know I'm trying to get you to bed soon. I'm getting you to bed soon.
Oh,
I'm an
over here
uplift.
rubbing my eyes like
No, I just
She's gonna turn the camera off and take a little snooze and come back to us with more brilliance.
we do. I know that was so much brain power that y'all just used to share all that information with us. And I do want to uplift a question that we got from the members, and either one of you can answer, and then we'll close this session out. But can you speak more about the role of culture in fighting fascism? How do we protect and politicize the spaces and cultural practices that have always been ours so they become centers of imagination, discipline, and revolutionary leadership again? Thank you for the member that submitted that. And I dropped it in the chat too. So what is the role of culture in fighting fascism, and how do we protect our cultural practices?
I think, culture is very important, but first of all, culture is not, we sometimes give culture short shrift in our definitions, because culture is not just something to put on your wall. It's not just a kente cloth to wear at graduation. It's not the music. Culture is the way we move in the world. It's a slogan. It's a form of speech. It's a, it is it is interactions, in my, when I was teenager, in this late 60s, early 70s. Well, I wasn't a teenager in the 60s. I'm not quite that old, but in the 70s, that just this idea of referring to each other as brother and sister on the street, that was that shaped my consciousness in an important way. Um, Aesthetically, the way we wore our hair, which is the same way I've worn it all these years, which is so much more convenient than doing anything else. But um, these were cultural choices that weren't about performance. I mean, a lot of our popular culture has been captured by the market, right? And it's captured by capitalist entities and gets, kind of spoon-fed back to us. But culture is very important, especially in an authoritarian and fascist regime. I think of, you know, uh, Chile under Pinochet. One of the first things they did was attack the muralists, the poets, the singers. They attacked the cultural, purveyors of culture. Many other places in South Africa, one of my dear friends who's now passed on, Willie Kosasile, was a poet who was, viciously persecuted. He was a man of words, not weapons, right? But the words were weapons, and they understood that. So I think there's so much work to do in the cultural arena to hold up artists, like Jamila Woods, or um, here in Chicago, Damon Williams, or Taina Asile, who was an Afro-Puerto Rican uh, artist in New York. Uh, Artists who are telling our stories, who are inspiring our people, who are making politics legible in a different register. That is so important. It is so important when they outlaw demonstrations that we have songs that they can't take away. And of course, in the mid 20th century Black freedom movement, there were the, SNCC freedom singers. Bernice Johnson Reagan comes out of that tradition, went on to do Sweet Honey in the Rock, and the Southern Free Theater, and many, cultural projects that were political projects, that were not propaganda projects, that they were political projects that brought people into what do we imagine and how do we find who we are deep in ourselves to have the courage to go out and fight to make that world possible. I mean, artists do that in a way that very few political speeches, very few academics, can do. And so I think culture is an important place and space, going back to the times of chattel slavery, where not only were there songs that told people how to escape and how to and where the next rebellion was going to be, but there were also quilts and family heirlooms, locks of hair and lockets that told people the history of their family and told people the history of resistance and told people logistics of resistance, right? Hidden inside cultural uh, projects and products. So I think that's extremely important. Some of the interesting, we have a project here of a group of 6 artists who are trying to do some interesting work, but projecting images on buildings, doing, lettering on the sidewalk, chalking sidewalks, having a slogan as the AIDS resistance movement did, in the time of the AIDS epidemic, which was silence equals death. Just that slogan came out of a creative process, and then it became an entry point for people who might not have done a lot more, but they wore those t-shirts and buttons, which said to everybody else that they passed on the street or in the subway or anyplace else that we're together, that you're not alone, that it's bigger than you and the people that you know. Um, so I think, culture is extraordinarily important, and we have allowed so much of our popular culture to be co-opted and captured by the market, and we need to liberate our artists.
Absolutely. Definitely agree with what you just shared, Barbara. And, I'm going to continue by lifting up a comrade, family member of Barbara and mine. We mentioned them earlier as Fresco, who's the director of communications at the Dream Defenders and was the minister, what we affectionately call the Minister of Culture at BYP 100. and it was not the first person to ever use the term unapologetically Black, but it's absolutely 10 toes down, I will say, the person who popularized it on international scales, frankly. And it wasn't just because it was cute on a shirt. It does look good. It was even that shirt has been bootlegged. I don't know how many times. That's how you know it's good, when it's been bootlegged. But it's a political stance, and there's a gesture or an effort towards cultural work. And understanding like literally what we put on our bodies, and not just the words or the images, but the shape of the clothing, the style of the clothing, all of those things convey a set of values and ideas to people, and that's a part of as one aspect of cultural organizing, and which exists in a longer tradition, right? That we know that the Black Panther Party did it. We also know that the SNCC, members of SNCC did it as well with what they decided to wear. So literally like what people wear, be it the overalls, the black berets, the leather, all of those things for better or for worse, and the hyper masculinity of some of those things, they convey things. And so that's one aspect of cultural work, and particularly cultural organizing. I'm a filmmaker, and frankly, I was an artist before I was an organizer. Like I used to sing, dance, act, all sorts of things when I was a younger person, or before I got into organizing more intensely. And literally what you said, Barbara, like one of the reasons I make films is because I can convey stuff much differently than I can in a speech or in a direct action or even a political education session or a workshop. I can tell stories visually and sonically and reach people and invite people into feeling things and thinking about things differently. And I am high key obsessed with filmmaking, and it's something I hope to be able to do for a very long time. But it's also a very expensive art form. Like it costs more to make a film than it does to do a lot of other things. But I think that now is I think any time is a perfect time, and I think now is a great time for people to make films with whatever equipment you have access to tell our stories, to come up with stories, um, write scripts, bring your people together, invite people into thinking about the world as it has been, the world as it is, and the world that could be. And that's a part of like the organizing of ideas, because our enemies and many of our opponents are organizing our people around ideas all the time, all the time. And so we have to do work outside of propaganda. It may include propaganda, but outside of propaganda, like overt propaganda, to organize our people around ideas of freedom, liberation, of Black feminism, that people can actually be organized into those ideas and take that work very seriously. And so I believe, and then the other prong of that, which was mentioned a little bit earlier, is what our spiritual practices are, whether they're religious or not. But your spiritual practice might be just like communing people for dinner or growing food, or it may be connected to like a organized faith system. Um, it could show up in many different ways, but I think when it comes to what our rituals are, our very rituals are that we have in our communities, in our households, are a part of our culture. Like Barbara said, it's how you are in the world, how you operate in the world. And so the rituals that we hold with each other, like what do we do when a comrade passes away? What do we do when a child is born? All of those things. What do we do when somebody reaches a milestone in their lives? Those are all cultural practices that we can either lean into, we can create, we can revitalize whatever that is, that helps us fight fascism. Because they want us to think in binaries. They want us to not be connected to each other. They want us to not be connected to the people who come before us, our ancestors. Not to. They want us to not be connected to land all of those things. And so our cultural practices, our rituals, our cultural work can absolutely be constant acts of refusal in the face of fascism.
Ooh, I don't know if the rest of y'all are invigorated by this conversation, but I'm so excited to continue to dive into these topics. And Charlene, low-key gave me a shout out because the next session on November 11th is on rituals, roles, and revolutionary care and culture. So definitely want to continue to explore those themes. So I just want to have one last question for y'all, and that is, do you have anything else on your heart or mind that you want to share with this group before we go off to our respective dinners and beds for the evening?
I just appreciate this. It's late here. I haven't had dinner, but I mean, I was looking forward to this because I think maybe it feels small. I don't know, that we take 2 hours to be together to get greater clarity and deepen our understanding and commitment. I feel, I'm not in Dream Defenders, but I feel very connected to Dream Defenders and the people that you all, pull together. And, um, I just want to express gratitude, and I want us to understand the value, as somebody who studies history of movements, when people are in the thick of something, and also sometimes when we feel like we're losing, we still don't realize the value of what seems like the little things we do. But the little things are cumulative. Uh, um, they're cumulative compilation of the total package, which is one that resists, that push back, that will ultimately win. Now, winning and losing is never absolute. When we win, sometimes, we won, and we realize, oh, we didn't win as much as we thought we did. But also sometimes when we're losing, we have that same kind of formula. Oh,
Mm,
we're defeated, we're losing, it doesn't matter what we do.
mm,
Everything we do as human beings pushing back against oppression, pushing for something different and better matters. And it is cumulative. It matters as the tribe grows. It matters as the understandings deepen. It matters as the hours add up. It matters over time. So I just want to remind us of that and express gratitude to all of you for the time you've taken out this evening, but particularly to Shaquille and the other, Dream Defenders for the work that you do and for making this possible. And to Charlene for being here with me. We've been on many panels together and many places together over the years, and she's very special to me. So I'm happy to be here with her tonight.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Charlene, any closing thoughts or offerings?
I mean, Barbara, oh my gosh. I don't even know what to say because this is being recorded, but I'm glad. Well, just thank you. Like, I don't know any other way. You've been extremely important to me in my life and my development, in my family's life and development, not just me. And so I'm grateful and I've learned so much from you. I still have a copy of your Ella Baker book that I was supposed to return to a comrade at least over a decade ago, and I never gave it back to him. It was before we met, long before we met, actually. Um, but I'm really grateful to have been a part of this conversation tonight with you and with y'all, Dream Defenders. Yeah, yeah, like we go way back. I go way back with the Dream. I was at the Dream Defenders first convening in Florida. I was at the very first one. Um, and so they never called me an honorary Dream Defender, but I'll claim that myself. And just you all have done such incredible and important work. And I think continue to push the broader movement to be more honest and more radical and more revolutionary, frankly. And how uncompromising y'all have been with your politics and your work. So I want to express deep gratitude to that. And for folks, whether newer or older to this work, like it's ongoing. It's ongoing. And even when we are on the other side of this particular like era, we'll still have work to do. Even when the prisons and the policing and all those things are abolished, we will still have work to do. I'm of that mind that even if it was all destroyed today, and the species started again, honey, we will still have to do work to make sure the same thing doesn't happen again. So it's just like, so take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Because we can't do the work if we are like sick, broke down, and just all, torn up. And so do what we can, so that we can be as well as we do the work. Because I don't know if I'll ever be. I don't know how you could be 100% well in this, but as well as possible. So thank you. I'm so grateful to have been a part of this. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Shaquille.
Thank you both. I'm so grateful. And thank you all for staying attentive on the line and engaging in the chat. We only have time left for our announcements, but I do want to flash up a little gallery walk that we'll send out to y'all. So on your own time, you can go through and see these other examples of Black feminist ideology and campaigns. And you're welcome to connect with me directly or in our Fight Club chat. Kim just dropped that link in the chat so that you can engage and learn a little bit more as we continue to dive deep. And Jordanis is going to close us out with some quick announcements. And we out of here. Jordanis, over to you.
All right. Thanks to everyone for sticking with us. I know we are ending in the next few minutes, so we do want to make sure y'all know what is coming up in our offerings. So one, like Shaquille mentioned, we will send a follow-up email with the recording. You'll also get recordings of the previous sessions if you weren't able to join that. And we have our next Fight Club sessions happening next month in November 11th and November 18th. So make sure to check us out then. Same time, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then next slide. So here are the things that we have upcoming. Tomorrow, October 29th, we are actually having our working groups launch. So especially for folks who are national, I know someone had mentioned that they live in Maine and don't have a community to connect with, whether you live in California or Florida or Georgia, we are creating national working groups that will be launching tomorrow. And that will be a call on what that entails and how to get plugged into that. It will be for our CREAM campaign, and each of those letters will be associated with a working group. Shaquille put that in the chat: comms, research, education, engagement, action, and member wellness. So if that's something you're interested in joining, there is an RSVP link for that, so you can join that tomorrow. The next thing is our member all calls. So these are calls that we host monthly, once a month, typically on Thursdays, to get updates from the organization and updates on how to plug in. And we will also have different squads giving highlights to what's happening locally on the ground. So that'll be on November 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll put that link in the chat for folks to sign up for that. And then the last thing is the December 4th membership orientation. So if you are not yet an official member with Dream Defenders, you can still sign up for our membership orientation. It will be the last one for the 2025 year. That will be on Thursday, December 4th from 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that will be virtual. So no matter where you're calling in from, anyone is welcome to join that if you are ready to commit as a member. So I'll put that link in the chat for that as well. And all of this information will also be emailed out to you. So if you lose the link in the chat, don't worry, it'll be sent in a follow-up email. And then the last two things are we have our feedback form. So we love to collect feedback based off our events, based off our calls and our political education sessions. So we'd love to hear from y'all. How did you think that this went? And then the second thing we have is our follow-up resources. So we are hosting one-to-one check-ins. If you would like to check in with Shaquille or another staff member, if you have like personal questions you want to ask about how other ways to get involved, or if you have personal thoughts that you just want to check in for like a quick 30-minute call on Zoom, and we can send a calendar link for you to schedule that in the next few days.
Thank you, Jordanos. Thank you all for being here. Have a beautiful rest of your week. Be safe. And as Barbara said, rehearse the world you want to live in. And Jess said, practice is the only way we learn how to do anything. So let's be in practice of revolutionary struggle, principled revolutionary struggle. Y'all have a beautiful evening. Thank you for being here. I will see y'all soon.